Let's jump back to the D&M Leasing Hotline. We're up with the program from Blogging the Boys, friend of the program, and just all around grade A human being, the one, the only Mr. Brandon Loree. And Brandon, if you had to take one person with you, if you were ever going to prison, and we hope you don't, but if God forbid if you had to, who's the one person you'd take with you?
I think you guys convinced me. CA is the top of the list here. I think, like you said, storytelling alone, I think he'd bring a lot of people together in a bad situation. So I'll put CA at the top of the list.
That's a great point. We appreciate you playing along and listening to the program as well. All right. Thankfully, there's no Cowboys going to prison right now. And right now, I mean, look, they're playing some pretty decent football if you stack up crappy football teams against them. What's been your biggest takeaway from how this team's played over the last 4 or 5 weeks?
I'll say rallying around all the injuries, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I think we've seen a lot of great things from Mike Zimmer and the defense, specifically when you lose a guy like a DeMarvion Overshone, who has been a lightning rod for this defense all season whenever he's been healthy and on the field. And when he went down, you saw the emotional toll that it kind of hit the locker room, especially with Micah Parsons, how he was getting all kind of choked up in the post-game interview. I think just when you lose a player like that, I think it really sends shockwaves through the locker room. So next man up mentality, Maris Leofau, I thought was awesome on Sunday. You can kind of see highlights of his game, how it's very similar to what Overshone can bring. And we've seen sort of Mike Zimmer's vision for what he had for this defense kind of come together. They're playing a lot tighter. They're playing a lot cleaner. Sure, they're having a few mistakes here and there, specifically on outside corner. But when you have corner 4 and corner 5 rolling out there, you can only do so much. So how do you help your corners? Well, that's specifically with the pass rush. And when you look at since Micah Parsons has returned in the lineup in Week 10, the team is first in sacks with 22, first in pressures with 131, and second in pass rush win rate with 54%. So all things are firing on the defensive side of the ball, and I think that's been the most impressive thing for me.
Brandon, it's good to have you back on. It's been too long. When you look at how us fans and us media kind of judge the coaching staff, mainly Mike Zimmer in that first half of the season, do you think we're a little too early to the punch and he's earned his keep here and you'd like to see him back another year? Or do you think this is just not great football teams and just the bar was set so low in the early season and now that's why they look good?
Yeah, I would love to have Mike Zimmer back. I thought it was interesting with Jerry's comments on 105.3 The Fan earlier where he was asked about, is Mike Zimmer and Mike McCarthy tied at the hip? And he believes that they are. And I think when you look at that comment, I think you also have to consider that, let's say Mike McCarthy is not the head coach next year. You have somebody else come in. Well, he might not necessarily want Mike Zimmer as the defensive coordinator. I know we've seen in the past where when Mike McCarthy came in, Kellen Moore was a must-have on the coaching staff. But I think it's just a lot harder when you're trying to keep a defensive guy when all these guys around the NFL want to bring in their guy. So I think if Mike Zimmer continues to have success, I think that actually elevates Mike McCarthy's chances of being back. Because if they want to bring back Mike Zimmer, I think that has to kind of happen where Mike McCarthy is still in the fold. And I will say that earlier in the year, I think they were still trying to figure things out. Communication didn't seem to be 100%. The argument can be made that your better players were on the field. How come they're playing better now? I just think that it was a rough season from the get-go. Teams are playing a lot better early in the year. It doesn't excuse a lot of the mistakes and accountability that should be had at Mike McCarthy's feet. But I think when all things are considered, the way that they're rallying around their coach right now, I don't think you can forget that. And that has to be considered when you're trying to evaluate if he's supposed to be back next year.
Well, and Brandon, I think the one thing, too, is let's call it what it is. Preseason isn't what it used to be. I don't think training camp's what it used to be. And so when you're incorporating so many new pieces and an entirely new scheme coming off of what happened last year, I think it's only right that it takes a little bit of time to kind of get everybody back on the same page and to get this unit moving in the right direction, especially when you lose your best player on defense, and that was Micah Parsons.
And not only that, we've talked about numerous times on the show when I've been on, and CA has brought it up too, the depth was absolutely gutted from this team, and they were replacing it with young, inexperienced players in someone like a DeMarvion Overshone, who we had high hopes for last year, but he was coming off of an injury. We're trying to see what he can bring to the table. Rico Dowdle was battling injuries his entire career. You didn't know what you would be getting when you're replacing somebody like a Tony Pollard, and then you have two young, inexperienced guys in rookies, and Tyler Guyton and then also Cooper Beebe taking over for Tyler Biadasz and Tyron Smith. So I think just overall the expectations were high, but they should have been a little bit more realistic, where that they had a lot of young players having to step up in for experienced depth. And I think that that's where you saw a lot of mishaps happen early in the year.
Brandon Loree blogging the boys. I'll ask you straight up, Brandon, will Rico Dowdle be RB1 for this team or even on this team next year?
I hope so. I think he's shown a lot recently when given the opportunities. We've seen how he's led the NFL in rushing over the last 3 weeks. He's hit career highs over the last 3 weeks and just continues to improve. Now, again, argument can be made it's against lesser opponents, but I just think him and the offensive line are starting to feel out their rhythm together. Again, Rico Dowdle, this is his first opportunity as a starter, and we were hearing from Brian Schottenheimer early in the year, like Rico's finally getting a feel for how he needs to hit the hole, how he's working with the offensive line. So you're starting to see that pay off now, and I would love to see that carry forward. That does not mean I don't think the Cowboys should draft a running back next year. I think they absolutely should draft someone, whether that be round 1, round 2, round 3. You look at what the Detroit Lions have built with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, what the whole league is turning into, where it's a run-first approach. I think it's so important to have a dynamic duo at running back, and if Rico can kind of be the bell cow while the rookie is starting to get the feel for the game, I think that would be a great problem to have. And then you kind of work the rookie in and then see who has the hot hand, and you go from there.
It kind of goes hand in hand when a running back's doing well, what their offensive line is doing. What has been your biggest reason why you think Rico has been playing well? Zach Martin steps down. We see Hoffman get some more playing time. We've seen Bass in there. We've seen Adoga and Guyton kind of rotate. Is Terrence Steele playing better? What's just been your thoughts of the offensive line kind of the last 4 or 5 weeks?
I think the offensive line, they're starting to have a feel for each other. And when you have somebody like Brock Hoffman being at the center of it, whether it was at the guard position or literally at the center position, I mean, he sets the tone. I mean, he brings such an attitude to this offensive line. And I think that's sort of like a shot in the arm that they needed. They needed to play tougher in the trenches. They were getting beaten up left, right, and sideways early in the year from defensive fronts in the first few weeks of the season. So when you bring somebody in who has that attitude, who carries himself like he's just going to beat somebody up every single play, you see that, every time you watch the All-22, Brock Hoffman is always finishing the play, whether he's throwing somebody into the ground or he's kind of barking at somebody. That's the type of guy that you need, and it kind of gets a lot of guys going. So I think we've heard a lot of that from other players along the offensive line, and I think Tyler Smith is starting to get a little bit healthier too. Tyler Guyton is starting to play a little bit better, again, hitting the rookie wall, trying to work his way through that. Terrence Steele has been better over the last few weeks. So I think just you need to build a little bit more continuity, and I think we're seeing the fruits of that.
What do you make of Jake Ferguson's year this year?
It's been disappointing, and not because of Jake and what he's been putting out on the field. I just think a lot of fans went into this year all excited about him, and I still am. Don't get me wrong. I am still really excited what Jake Ferguson can be. I just think relative to expectations and where I think a lot of people expected him to be in that top 10 conversation, I still think he can be there. I just think with injuries and the lack of rhythm that was happening on offense, I just think that hurt him early on. I do think that maybe over the next few weeks, we see him get a little bit more involved as he's kind of coming back from the concussion that he suffered. I just think he needs a positive finish to the end of the season just to carry that into next year. I think a lot of guys do. I mean, when the conversation is being had about are the Cowboys winning more games than they should, they're getting out of draft position. To me, you win these games, and the draft position falls wherever it may. The Cowboys have historically shown they can draft wherever, whether it's pick number 11, pick number 24. They don't get the guys right all the time, but their hit rate is a lot higher than a lot of guys and a lot of teams around the NFL. So I think you need positive momentum, and Jake Ferguson is certainly one of those players that I hope continues to build as we go towards the end of the season.
Brendan, what's your thoughts on the Dallas Cowboys roster building, especially over the last 5-10 years? Stephen Jones kind of mentioned when you have 3 guys making the money that they're projected to make and are already making, it's kind of tough to build a team around that, kind of insinuating maybe a little bit of buyer's remorse. Do you think they've been smart in their roster building, and kind of what would you do in their shoes moving forward?
I wish they would spend a little bit more in free agency. There's no doubt about that. I think a lot of fans would echo the same sentiment, but they are a draft and develop team. That's who they've been. That is in their DNA. They trust Will McClay implicitly with everything. And we've seen that it's turned out great. Tyler Biadasz turned into a Pro Bowl player. I don't know if a lot of people saw that happening when he was first drafted, especially in the 4th round as a 4th-round player. Deron Bland was plucked from Fresno State, and nobody really knew about him until he turned into an all-pro cornerback. And so they've hit on a lot of their top-end players as well, but I think they need to build a lot more of their depth. If they're not going to be spending in free agency and they lose a lot of their depth players in the offseason, they have to replace them in free agency with these 1 to 2 year deals. We saw the Cowboys historically be this 1 to 2 year deal type team. You brought in the J-Ron Curses, the Malik Hookers, your Dante Fowlers, and those were your sort of key pieces for a big push in the playoffs, especially when those rotational guys had to come in. But you also have to hit on your star players, whether that's in the first, second, third round of the draft, and then you develop them and then go from there. So I just think they have to be more active in free agency. We didn't see that as much this offseason. It was your Eric Kendricks and Zeke Elliott. And I think Eric Kendricks has been phenomenal, but you have to kind of take a little bit more bite at the apple for that.
We know that this Cowboys team has been riddled with injury. We can look across the NFL and we see other teams, the 49ers, certainly jump out as a team that's just been beaten up by the injury bug this year. And nobody in their right mind expects them to get rid of Kyle Shanahan, right? I mean, we all expect. And, of course, obviously they've had a lot of success. Given everything that's gone down with this Dallas team and with the way Jerry has talked about Mike McCarthy, and he's been quite flattering of Mike McCarthy pretty much throughout the course of the year, provided this team doesn't fall off a cliff over these next 3 weeks, and I certainly don't expect that to be the case, do you see a scenario where Mike McCarthy isn't the head coach next year?
I will say it's important, I think, for him to win 2 out of the next 3. And I think specifically, I think it's the home games against the Buccaneers and the Commanders. I think, like I mentioned, you have to finish strong to the end of the season. These next 3 games are up against playoff caliber teams. Like, these are teams that are in the playoff hunt or in the playoffs currently. So I think the Cowboys have to show some fight. They have to show some grit. Jerry wants to see how the character of this team responds. He has brought that up numerous times of how Mike McCarthy is able to get his guys to show in the face of adversity a lot of positive things. I think it's more likely that Mike McCarthy is coming back. But I will say, I mean, if things all kind of fall apart over these next 3 weeks, they get blown out and kind of get back to business as usual like it was in the beginning of the year, I would say it's unlikely he would be back. But I think things are trending in the right direction, rightfully, wrongfully, however people believe. I just think that the Cowboys front office would like to feel comfortable, and comfortable is Mike McCarthy. And I think heading into next year with everybody healthy, you have Dak and CD under contract now. You know where the future is going. Still have to figure out things with Micah Parsons, but on the offensive side of the ball, things will be trending upward. You just got to get the right pieces in place.
Has Osa priced himself out of the Cowboys' price range?
I think so.
Let's go.
Again, that's another player I would love back. And when Micah was talking about the team maybe spending big in free agency, I hope that means to bring back Osa, get it on a Tyrone Crawford type deal. You know, maybe he comes back for a hometown discount. But at the end of the day, I mean, you see how many injuries have happened not only in the past week that are really scary injuries, but look at the Cowboys and where Trayvon Diggs has been at over the past 2 years. Like, it's important for these guys to take all the money that they can as early as possible so that it protects them in case something happens where it's a career-threatening injury that's sustained. So I think Osa's been on an upward trajectory for the past few years. The biggest thing about him is that I didn't think that there was a strong finish to the end of the year, but we're seeing him now kind of go in the reverse where maybe the beginning of the year was a little slower, but he's finishing strong. I think defensive tackle is a premier position now. It started with Aaron Donald, but you're seeing a lot of guys like Chris Jones, Kobe Turner, even Tavondre Sweat in Tennessee. You're starting to see a lot of these big boys get big paydays. And I wouldn't be shocked if Osa does price himself out. It would be a big loss because when you think about where they're at with Mozzie Smith and then having to replace Osa, it's like now the defensive tackle becomes an even bigger worry next year. So I think getting him back would be a key priority for me. But it might not be at the same price range the Cowboys are thinking at.
Yeah, Brandon, that's what I was echoing. I was trying to let Fred know.
I threw that out there just for Blake. You know, we got to, I like to butter up his ego every now and again, even though he has no idea about the Flintstones or the Jetsons. We know you're with Blogging the Boys, but tell the folks at home about the press coverage newsletter.
Yeah, it's covering the NFL at large, kind of retooling things ahead of next year. I got some big plans ahead of that, so be sure to be on the lookout for that on Substack. And, of course, you can always find me at Brandon is Right. That's WRITE. I will say, Blake, to your credit, I mean, Flintstones is an old show, but I will say I kind of gotten excited about the Flintstones-Simpsons crossover that you were kind of teasing a little bit. I was a Looney Tunes guy back in the day for me.
Great show.
But I'll always have to give respect to the Flintstones.
Animaniacs, Looney Tunes.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
I mean, Bugs Bunny is still pound for pound the greatest cartoon character of all time. Brandon, great stuff from you as always, my friend. Go Cowboys this weekend, and we'll talk again next week.
Awesome. If I don't talk to you guys, have a happy holiday too.